A Scary Home Companion is sponsored by Totally Tidy LLC. A female-owned business, Totally Tidy specializes in cleaning homes above the industry standard. They are raising the bar. Get clean with Totally Tidy. Currently looking for employees in southern Indiana. If you are in the area of Evansville and Newburgh, contact Totally Tidy today. TOT-Tidy@hotmail.com and on Facebook as Totally Tidy LLC. The Canadian Rangers were officially formed in 1947. They're a component of the Canadian Armed Forces, roughly 5,000 in number, which makes them the smallest component of the Canadian Armed Forces. The vast majority of the Rangers are native. It is their charge to patrol, survey, and protect the outermost reaches of Canada, the wild woods of Quebec, the frozen tundra of Saskatchewan, the endless empty of the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. The Rangers are scouts, guides, rescue specialists. They inspect and repair remote research installations. They teach survival skills to other soldiers. They conduct sovereignty patrols. They are ever on the ready to protect Canada and her citizens against any and all threats. Being a ranger is a special calling, one that very, very few are capable of. I would dare say the Canadian Rangers are among the toughest people alive, and let me tell you why. Being a ranger isn't a job, it's a way of life. A ranger doesn't go to work or get days off. They live in their sector. And every single day, all day, they're on duty. They might have to go out into the field for days or even weeks at a time, exploring the farthest corners of their land. And most of the time, they work alone. Most of the time. There are special situations that arise every once in a while. Events either troubling, horrific, or downright inexplicable. Canada is a land of legend and lore, steeped in native traditions and old spirits. Because of this, the Rangers started the 303 unit in 1953. It was named after the standard issue .303 Enfield rifle that was issued to all Rangers. The 303 are the ones that other Rangers call when they need help. The most famous Rangers in history have all been native, and all of them have served for the 303. From Elmira Tusk and Sam Sawtooth, to Ekmo Hunter and Seven Seas, and most recently, a standout agent named Cordelia May. This episode is partially a story about Cordelia and her last tour with the Rangers. But it's also a taste of several decades worth of bold and astounding tales of the 303. Drinking whiskey in the kitchen and telling scary stories around the fire. Music, monsters, and mayhem. Killers, cannibals, and cults. Fearful fiction and furious fact. Tall tales and terrifying truths. This is a Scary Home Companion. The twin-engine plane touched down on a small airstrip an hour north of Baker Lake, deep in the heart of Nunavut, the Arctic archipelago. They were so close to the Arctic Circle that Sadie Jane could feel it in her bones when she stepped out of that plane. Her pilot, who was a ranger, watched her go but didn't follow. Her escort was already waiting, standing next to an oversized snowmobile, wearing full gear. The escort was also a ranger, dispatched from the 303 unit. She was here to provide safe passage for this honored guest. Her name was Cordelia May. Cordelia May was a skilled and experienced ranger, the best of the best. Nunavut born and bred, 8 years in the field. She'd been to Frozen Witch Lake, the Belfort Pass, deep Indigo Caves. She'd been everywhere. She'd seen it all. Rumor had it, she'd even bagged a Wendigo at one point. But this was the first time that Cordelia May had ever pulled an assignment quite like this. Not just playing field guide, and not just playing field guide for an outsider, but an American, and one that was so thin and small and frail looking. She was like a ghost lost inside the depths of her own parka. Cordelia had to shout through her face mask and over the rumble of the engine. "Miss Jane, how was your flight?" "Call me Sadie," the woman said. She took off her glove before extending her hand. Against her better judgment, but out of that deeply ingrained sense of Canadian politeness, Cordy did likewise. "I'd be more comfortable being more formal if you don't mind," she said. "That's fine. Miss Jane it is. I appreciate your time in this, Ranger." Sadie had questions, but Cordelia insisted that they get moving. They still had an hour ride in either direction, and with the weather raging all around them, there was little time to spare. Cordelia drove, Sadie rode behind her. She leaned into the native woman, holding on loosely. Cordy could barely even feel her there. The trail was jagged. They zigzagged north through a frozen forest. Sadie looked for landmarks, but everything was a drifting white erasure. Time started to lose meaning. Had it been 10 minutes or 10 hours? When they stopped, they were on the top of a small hill, a gentle slope above the treetops. Cordy cut the engine. She handed her charge a set of field glasses and pointed north. "Look there, it'll jump right out at you." And indeed, it did. Out in the midst of all those waves of white was a clearing, a roughly shaped oval in which there was no snow and no vegetation. At least, no native vegetation. Instead, it was a ghastly garden. Gnarled, mottled purple vines dressed in thorns. Skeletal saplings seeping scarlet sap. And an ugly rust-colored mold that blanketed the ground. "I don't recommend going any closer without a biohazard suit, Miss Jane. I did bring one if you're interested." Sadie shook her head. "No, thank you. I'd heard this place existed, I just needed to see it for myself." "Yes, ma'am, I understand. I did the same thing when I first started here. I'm researching the cartographer. Are you familiar with him?" "Of course. He worked with the 303 several times. That was long before I was a ranger. Sadie said, his first maps of this place were in the 70s, I believe. Do you have any idea how long it's actually been here? The Inuit don't keep a lot of written records, so it's hard to say. But there are stories about this area, about how it isn't safe to hunt or to travel through here. And those go back 9 generations. Do the Inuit have a theory on what this place is? They say the land has been poisoned. That's the direct translation, but there's a lot more nuance to a Nukkatut. It doesn't mean poison like poison, more like an invasive species, a spiritual poison on the land. Huh. Do you know if it's getting bigger? To the naked eye, no. But no one's felt the need to go down and measure it in a very long time. Well, you could use drones to measure it. Miss Jane, we have a lot of places like this that we like to keep clear of. We ignore them the best we can. Haven't had an issue with this place in many years, and we aim to keep it that way. Sadie looked through the binoculars again. She studied the edges of the clearing and how the trees closest had withered and started leaning away from the accursed garden. But you said it's an invasive species. You rangers protect Canada, right? Not just the people, but the land. So, if just us gals talking, if there was a way to contain it or destroy it, would your bosses be amenable to that? Cordelia shrugged and checked her watch. That's above my pay grade, Miss Jane. I do think you might find someone ready to listen. What do you have? Well, nothing yet. Just some new tech that we're beta testing. You're not just here to beta test the tech, though, are you, Miss Jane? They rode back to the landing strip in silence. The pilot was gone, but the plane was refueled and ready for takeoff. Cordelia explained that making the flight to Resolute with 3 people was logistically far more complicated than with 2. So she would be flying. You can pilot, Sadie said. Well enough. Can run a dog sled too if I have to. When you're a ranger, you gotta know how to get around. The flight to Cornwallis Island was choppy and rough the entire way. The great northern winds swatted at the plane like an irritating bug. But Cordelia stayed calm. She hummed along with some inner tune. The 2 women spoke of the cartographer, about what the rangers knew about him. Sadie had been a keen observer of the cartographer's work. She'd collected as many of his maps as was possible. The history of this man was vague, mostly constituted with legend and rumor. The cartographer was a map maker for the government. Which government is hotly disputed, but it was certainly a government. The man had a rare gift when it came to making maps. This gift is also hotly disputed, although a newer theory posits that the cartographer was a genius-level autistic in a time when society wasn't really aware of autism. The cartographer had been the first to chart out the soft places, the broken spots in our world. He didn't know what they were, simply that they did not fit into a proper map. They couldn't be explained. Nazino Island, the Devil's Triangle, Carthage, 2 different places in northern Canada. Now Sadie had been to one of these 2 places herself, and would soon visit the other. But first, there was time for something different. There are all kinds of evil in the world. Getting tunnel vision wouldn't help her cause. Sadie had only just learned about the northernmost library in the world, and she had to see it for herself. It might not be connected to what she was working on, but it might. No one seemed to know what it was or how it got there, and the Rangers in the 303, they welcomed a fresh perspective on the place. The plane touched down in Resolute, population 166. Another Ranger was waiting for them with transport. This was a much larger snow machine than the last one. It had a small cab that allowed the 2 of them to sit side by side. There was no heat, but at least they were out of the biting sub-zero winds. They drove through impossibly thick snowdrifts, creeping slowly for almost 2 hours until they came upon it. It was a humble structure, 2 stories tall, crafted from logs and lumber, and although it had been there for a long time, it still looked strong. It stood out as the lone landmark in a big, white empty. Cordelia parked outside the front door. She took a key from a hook hidden in the eaves and let herself in. "So you've been here before?" Sadie asked her. "Yes, ma'am. You didn't read the file?" Sadie looked around the darkened room. Floor to ceiling, corner to corner, were shelves jam-packed with books, journals, and loose papers. "No, I just heard about this in passing. I haven't seen the file. Tell me." Cordelia found an oil lantern and lit it with a wooden match. Dull orange light created a circle around the 2 of them. Cordelia said, "We first found this place about 15 years ago. Pretty much just like you see it, as far as I know. It was noteworthy just for the sheer oddity of it, but nothing more. It's just a weird thing, so we kept an eye on it and checked in every few months. Over time, there were some weird stories. A ranger would find a lantern lit. Maybe this lantern. Or there would be food in the pantry that wasn't there before. Once, a ranger found a note thanking us for checking the place and saying that the food was for us. Just plain old Canadian hospitality, I suppose. But no one ever saw anyone here, and we never saw any tracks either. No sign of anyone coming or going. And then there's the thing with the books." Sadie picked up a journal from the shelf. Cordelia touched her wrist to stop her from opening it. "No, ma'am, I wouldn't do that. That's one of the stories. Some of these books, they aren't books. When you try and read them, It makes you vomit or pass out. Some of the maps, too, that's what they say. Don't try and lay eyes on them, or you're going to get bad sick. Sadie put the book away. Really? Yes, ma'am. I was warned about it as part of my training. And you believe it? Yes, ma'am, I do. But not because of my training. Because of the first time I came here. When I saw him. When you saw who? The man who built this place. We call him the Canadian. As I said, the Rangers check in on this place every now and again. I was on the regular circuit. When I came up, I saw a light inside. No tracks, but there was a light inside. The front door was already open, and looking in, I see there's a man laying on the floor. Right over there, she pointed. He's covered in blood. He's got a deep cut in his thigh. He managed to get a tourniquet on, but then he'd passed out. And when I found him, he was in a race between freezing to death and bleeding to death. I got him patched up. I got him warmed up. I put food and water in him. I nursed him back to health. Well, what did he say to you? Sadie asked. Well, ma'am, he's Canadian. He said thank you. Longer. Slightly south and west into the Northwest Territories. Well past Kugluktuk and Paulituk, into the middle of a dizzying expanse of frozen lakes, so remote that most of them had never been seen by human eyes, much less given a name. There they found the lost hamlet of Evidlik. Cordelia knew the legend by heart and didn't mind sharing. In 1933, there had been 140 residents in this tiny community. This far north, that's a huge population, and those numbers gave them strength. It only took a few months before one of them started to go mad. It might have been cabin fever. There was also talk of witchcraft and dark spirits. This man had nightmares that drove him insane. One night, he took his wife and children into a cave beneath Evedlik and slaughtered them. He used their fresh blood to paint a door on the rocks. But the door would not open. So the man went out to find more victims. He took another man's wife and child. That man followed the killer down below in hot pursuit, but he was too late to save everyone. As his wife died, the man saw that painted door open just for a moment. In this moment, he realized that the killer might be evil, but that he was not crazy. He was offering blood sacrifice to horrific demons on the other side of that door. demons who were very real. This man managed to save his child and avenge his wife using brutal violence. But it did not satisfy him. He wanted vengeance against those demons as well. So he vowed to open the door once again, that he might walk through it and kill those demons with his bare hands. The girl, his daughter, ran. She ran not just from the cave, but from the hamlet itself. Mostly, she ran from her father. She saw that the killer's madness had spread into him, had infected him, and she knew that there was much more blood to be spilled. Cordelia circled the village twice. The ground below was surprisingly clear, and although drifts encircled most of the remaining huts and structures, there were long open swaths of clear ground down the center of the village, making for an easy landing strip. Once Sadie got out of the plane, she understood why the snow and ice was so thin here. The ground felt warm, even through her boots. The two women walked towards the largest building that was still standing upright, at the very end of the lane, built over the mouth of the cave. Cordelia continued her story. That man kept killing. He would drag his victims down into this cave and murder them on the painted door. He did it over and over and over again, until one day it worked. The door opened. But he didn't get to walk through because the demons came out for him. And not just for him, but everyone in Evedlek. They dragged every last man, woman, and child back to hell with them. And that door is still there, painted on those rocks. The only survivor of the Evedlek massacre was the girl who ran. Her name was Elmira Tusk. She would become one of the first wave of Canadian Rangers in 1947. 6 years later, she founded the 303 unit. This is her town, and it always will be. We keep an eye on it for her memory. They stood outside the building, right at the door. Sadie looked at it. She wavered on her feet just a little. "Are you okay, Miss Jane?" Yes. Can you feel that? I mean, have you been inside, Ranger? Have you seen the door down there? Slowly, Cordelia shook her head. Yes. No, I haven't seen the door. But yes, I can feel it. That's why I haven't seen the door. Do you want to go in? No, I don't. You have to trust your instincts, right? My instincts tell me that I already know what's down there. Yes, ma'am. Always trust your instincts. Sadie smiled at that, as if something had been confirmed for her. Say, Ranger, did you really kill a Wendigo? No, ma'am. Not a Wendigo. She raised a hand, showing 3 fingers. 3? Let me ask you, Miss Cordelia May, what would you think about moving to Florida and working for me? Thank you for listening to another episode of A Scary Home Companion. Find the show on social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Or contact us directly at ascaryhomecompanion@gmail.com. You can also find a lot of our episodes with script videos on our YouTube channel. For the best possible Scary Home Companion experience, visit our Patreon page. Bonuses and extras with one exclusive episode every single month. You won't get the whole story unless you're on Patreon. You can also use Patreon to sponsor the show, as with Totally Tidy LLC. The episode was edited and produced by Jeff Davidson. It featured the music Run to Canada by Min-Y-Llan, Falling Off the Map by Spectre Folk, Skango by Caballo and the Muthafu Kings, and Henry Burr provided his version of, for my money, the greatest national anthem in the world, O Canada. As always, Chelsea Oxendine with the theme music. Stop,